Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll hear an inspiring story about two sisters who traveled from Scotland in 1859 to the Red River Valley. But first, joining me now is longtime and downtown Fargo businessman and owner of Zambro's Variety, Greg Dans. Greg,
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
As we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay. Well, I was raised in North Dakota, went to high school in Mandan, North Dakota, and college in Moorhead, Moorhead State. It was a teacher's college when I went there. It was that long ago. And then I worked for my dad for many years in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, until we started our store, Zambro's, and it's kind of it in a nutshell. But.
Well, with that said, when did Zambro's start and how did it start?
Well, my brother and I both worked for my dad. At one point, he was ready to retire. He asked us, do you want to take over the business? It was a dairy processing business. We liked working for my dad, but it didn't seem like what we wanted to do with the rest of our lives. And meanwhile, we had each fixed up old houses in Sioux Falls and enjoyed it. And downtown Sioux Falls was kind of in rough shape, and we had an opportunity to buy an old building in downtown Sioux Falls, and we spent about a year rehabbing it and having fun doing that on weekends and nights while we kept our other job. And then we got done and said, well, what are we going to do with it? And we were looking for a new career, something new to take our interest, and we decided to open a store. And that was in 1988, July of '88, I believe we opened in Sioux Falls, and been going ever since.
Yeah, are people surprised around North Dakota and Minnesota area to hear you actually started in Sioux Falls?
You know, sometimes they're surprised. They'll ask me, is there more than one Zambro's? And I'll tell them, well, yeah, the first one's in Sioux Falls. It's a year and a half older, and yeah, I think they are, but I've been here now 20 years or 24 years, so I think they think of me as a North Dakotan, and I was originally a North Dakotan, so I feel comfortable being here.
Well, you said, okay, so you said a year and a half later, so
Yep.
89 or 90, you moved up to Fargo. So why the decision to come to Fargo and open a second store?
Well, when we started the store, we quit. My dad sold the dairy to Land O'Lakes, actually, and we worked for them for a little bit, and then we decided let's do the store. And but then we also realized we need to make a living and support two families, so we decided we should probably open a second store and just have enough synergy there to support two families. And because I had gone to college here, I had 4 sisters living in Fargo Moorhead at the time, and one of whom used to work for Leiby's, which is the building we bought. And so we decided Fargo was the logical place, a lot like Sioux Falls. My wife's from Battle Lake, Minnesota. We decided that, you know, Renee and I would move up here and Jeff would stay there, and we'd have 2 stores, run them together. So in December 5th, I believe it was, in 1991, we opened the store in Fargo. And we've continued to operate both stores together as a partnership. And
Okay, so 91. So is the Sioux Falls store or the Far, are they similar or are there differences?
they're very similar. They're different buildings. They're both older buildings that we've fixed up. So there's, you know, the character of the buildings is different. But also, you know, over the years, we're partners, but Jeff, my brother, and his wife, and then myself and my wife, and now my daughter, we have different tastes, different interests, so the stores naturally gravitate to our interests. And so where we carry a lot of the same inventory, do a lot of the things the same way, you will notice differences if you walk into Zambro's South or Zambro's North, but those are mostly just dependent on our personalities. So
Now, are both stores located in a downtown building?
they are.
Yeah.
They are. The Sioux Falls store is on Phillips Avenue, which is basically their Broadway, and we're on Broadway. And we made a conscious effort to be downtown. We grew up in Mandan, going downtown. Bismarck was the big downtown for us, and we always liked the character of it, and we liked part of our mission was to take an old building and do something productive with it, which at the time was easier to do than it is now, to afford to do. And but it was probably harder to do in other ways just because of the downtowns. But,
Sure. Well, let's talk about your store here, especially in Fargo for now. And what all does it offer?
We're called Zambro's Variety, and the variety's there for a reason, and that's that when we started, you know, I've been a book guy. I was an English major in college, and I wanted to sell books, but we also knew that we couldn't make a living just selling books. And my brother liked pens, my wife liked jewelry, body products, so we kind of gravitated to things we liked. And when we opened the stores, we also consciously tried to we looked around Sioux Falls and then looked around Fargo. Okay, what isn't here? What can we add to the community? What can we bring to these towns that's new? And so we also looked for that. And we've evolved over the years. There are some things we used to do that we don't do, and there are things we do now that we didn't used to do. And that's partly because our interests have changed, and our customers have forced us to change in other cases. So.
Yeah, well, with that said, one of the questions I have here for you, in fact, Tom Hanks had a movie about the big bookstore and shutting down the little bookstore. But can you talk about how your store has had to evolve over the years with the advent of
Sure.
like a Barnes & Noble?
Sure. You know, the 27 years we've been in business, 25 in Fargo, things have changed a lot in the book world. When we first started out, there was one other independent bookstore in Fargo. There were really no other independent bookstores in Sioux Falls. Barnes & Nobles in both communities opened shortly after we did. And everything was moving to big box and huge chain stores. And a lot of people, in fact, independent bookstores nationally really suffered through the 90s and into 2000. And there were people who said bookstores are done, Amazon, Barnes & Noble will rule the world. But we persevered, and things have changed, and it's actually been really fun to watch. The last 3 or 4 years have been our best years for books, and people are reading again. There was e-books. Books were going to go away. People only read them online. And I remember I still do, I go to classes at the college and talk about books and publishing and that kind of thing. And I told students for years, they're not going away. People will always want to hold a book in their hand. And we're glad to see that actually kind of a renaissance with the book. More independent bookstores have opened in the last 3 years. First 3 years that more have opened than closed. And so it's coming back. And, you know, the big box stores, some of them are gone. Borders being an example. Barnes & Noble now, it's kind of interesting if you see the newest trends. They're opening small stores. They're trying to emulate what independent bookstores are doing. If you walk into a Barnes & Noble now, it's not all books. They're more like Barnes & Noble Variety. So we've had independent bookstores have had an influence on them, and they've had their own struggles.
Well, with that said, and you explained it a little bit there, economically, Barnes & Noble had to hurt book sales, at least at Zambro's, in the first years. Yep. But then, do you find out that you have loyal customers that keep coming back, or are you evolving customers?
You know, and it's not just with books, it's with independent retailing in general. We've got a really supportive communities in both Fargo and Sioux Falls, and there's a lot of people that recognize that they need to support local businesses because they add a lot to the community, and they do things that box stores, big box stores and chain stores don't do for the community. And obviously there's things that those stores do offer to the community, but we've had very, very supportive customer base. I've got customers in Fargo that have become my good friends. They've been coming in for 25 years, and they're still loyal and still supporting us. And the great part is we're getting young people are replacing those people or becoming part of those people. We're finding really good community support among all ages, and I think that's just recognition that independent business does add to the community, and whether it's books or whatever you're selling.
Yeah. Well, I know my dad he used to work at a soda fountain drugstore, soda
cool.
fountain, but you had one at one point. So
We did.
What
We
happened
did.
on the decision you had to close down, like what I call the old-fashioned
Right.
soda fountain and coffee bar? And yeah, tell me about
Well,
that.
the reason we had it in the first place, I told you I worked for my dad, who was in the dairy business, and he started out with Bridgman Russell. His first job on either side of World War II was going around setting up soda fountains for Bridgman Russell, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. And he was our biggest supporter financially and spiritually. And he said, one condition is, you know, I want you to have a soda fountain. And we go, yeah, whatever, Dad. But at the time we opened both stores, for example, believe it or not, you could not buy a cappuccino in Fargo or a latte. There wasn't such a thing. There was no Starbucks. There were no independent. Luna Coffee here in Fargo opened the same year we did. They opened almost the same time. So we filled a need for a coffee bar. And as part of it, we did a soda fountain. We grew up in the dairy business, and I still have the soda fountain there, which if anybody wants to open a soda fountain, give me a call. I can hook them up. And we had great fun with it. You know, I remember my dad, you will remember this, but in the old days, soda fountain people had to wear little paper hats. And my dad literally made us wear little paper hats when we started. That didn't last long because it was hard to get an 18-year-old kid, even 25 years ago, to wear a little paper hat. So, but we had a lot of fun with it, and it was a big part of getting our stores going.
Yeah, well, that's great. But sorry that it's gone by the wayside for now. Well, let's go back to books, and you bring in authors for book signings and even some readings. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. That's been a really fun part of the business for me. I love books. I love meeting the people who put books together and who write books. And, you know, we're in Fargo and Sioux Falls, so we're not exactly, you know, on the literary route for publishers. So it's been a struggle at times, and we focus on regional writers. We do a lot of regional writers, and we have some really good writers in both of our communities. And so we focus on them, but we've always, you know, reached out to publishers and authors and tried to convince them that, you know, Fargo is a great place to send their authors. One I remember years ago, James Welch, who's a nationally known writer, had a book out called Killing Custer, and I thought, man, we got to get this guy to Fargo, you know, it's Custer country. And I called up the publisher, and they said, well, no, he's not coming to North Dakota in the middle of the winter. I mean, what do you expect the guy to do? And I said, well, he lives in northern Montana. I think he can handle it. And so he was an example where, you know, I tracked him down. I got his phone number. I called him and said, hey, you want to come to North Dakota? And we helped him get a reading in Jamestown so that it was worth him coming out. And I drove him to Jamestown. So we've had to do things like that just to convince sometimes people to come. But it's been really fun, and I think been an asset to our community. We've had some really, really interesting people here over the years.
Well, as this show now broadcasts in March, can you talk about some of the upcoming events you might have at the store?
Well, I don't, on top of my head, I don't have any, for example, author events coming up, but one event that's, I think it'll be our third or fourth year, is Independent Bookstore Day, which is a national move by independent bookstores to just kind of try to blow their own horn and tell people about their place in the community. And it's been really, really fun. The last several years, we've brought in authors, we've had book deals going on. We've made a day of it and really had fun with it. And that will be, I believe, the last Saturday in April, whatever that is. So look for Independent Bookstore Day celebration, and that's one I can tell you about.
Okay. Well, I understand maybe it's time to turn over the reins, or at least you're getting your daughter involved and maybe passing off a little bit of work to her. Can you tell me about the family business, so to speak?
I grew up in a family business. I worked for my dad from the time I was, you know, don't tell the feds, but 7 or 8 years old, and always enjoyed being part of a family business. And when we started Zambros, it was my brother and I and our wives, and my daughter at the time was just a wee little girl, but from the time she's been 6 or 7 years old, she has been in the store and telling me what to do and telling me she knew a better way to do it. And I've been really lucky and blessed that the last, I must be 5 or 6 years now. She's worked full-time for me, and she's become just a really super integral part of the store. And over the last couple of years, it's become apparent that she actually enjoys it and has a knack for it. And my hope is that she'll want to keep it going. Now, I'm not ready to call it quits yet, so I hope she'll let me, be part of it for a while longer before she kicks me out the back door. But I'm really excited by the prospect, and in fact, I'm hopeful. I have a son who lives in Portland, Oregon, and happily married, and they're talking about moving back to Fargo, and I'm hoping I can get them involved in the business too.
Well, 25 years in Fargo in business downtown. Talk about how it's changed over the years in downtown area.
It's been incredible. When we opened up, everybody said, "You're crazy, downtowns are dead." And this was not just Fargo, this was Sioux Falls, this was pretty much everywhere in cities our size. Downtowns are dead, malls rule, all that kind of stuff. We thought there was a place for us, and we thought there was a place for downtowns. And when we started in Fargo, for example, you had Wimmer's Jewelry, Royals Jewelry, Strauss Menswear were the anchors of downtown. And Wimmer's and Royal are still there and still doing a great job. But now there's another 50 people who have come downtown, and we've been really excited to be part of that process. And we think we're the most vibrant part of Fargo nowadays. And downtown, if anybody was around in the 90s and is around now, they can testify to the difference and the great progress we've made.
Yeah. Were you ever tempted to move from downtown?
Nope. There were some hard years in the early 90s where we're going, what are we doing down here? We're rowing a boat all by ourselves. But no, we were never tempted, partly because we want to do something we enjoy. And being downtown was a big part of that. And we also wanted to be beyond the store. We wanted to be a part, both in Sioux Falls and Fargo, of making downtown vibrant again. And we got involved, and I think we've been part of that process. And I remember we talked at one time about a second location in the mall, and I'm glad we did. We decided against it and just focus on what we were doing and make that work.
Yeah. Is parking a problem downtown?
Parking's always been an issue downtown. 25 years later, it's still an issue. We've made great progress. I would tell people that come downtown, you might have to walk a little bit, but that's good for you. There are plenty of parking opportunities, and that's been part of our crusade. Zambros has been real involved in, we need parking structures downtown, we need to get in the modern world, and the city needs to help the community get this done. And it's finally coming to fruition. We're going to have our first new parking ramp that's in the heart of downtown. Will be opening in this next year, and I think that's going to be the start, and we'll hopefully have another one or two come along as we keep making progress, but it'll continue to get better.
I understand you've served on boards and committees throughout the years, and you've done that just to be a part of can you talk about some of that?
Some of it I've done just because I felt like it was a responsibility. I remember when I moved to Fargo, John Stern, Strauss's Menswear, he was very welcoming, and I always use him as a model. He got me on the chamber, he got me on the chamber board, he got me involved in downtown stuff. Made it easy for me to get involved, and I've stayed involved, and some of them have been way more fun than others. My proudest one, I was on the Fargo Theater Board for, I can't remember how many years, a couple different terms, and got to work with some really great people, got to be part of making the Fargo Theater a permanent part of downtown. My other one that I'm proudest of is back when Bruce Furness was mayor of Fargo, we had a big controversy over what should we do downtown. Should we redo Broadway? People probably don't remember, but we had literally closed Broadway at one point, and we had these goofy structures, and it was really tough. You think it's tough to navigate now. It was really tough then. And a group of us worked really hard for several years and with the city, and we got Broadway rebuilt. And I think our Broadway today is, you know, it's now 10, 12 years later, is one of the coolest streets you'll go up and down in any community.
Well, I'm sorry, we're out of time. So if people want more information about your store, where can they go? Who can they contact?
They can just stop in and say hi, and we're always glad to visit. That's part of being a small business. But we have a website, Zandbroz.com. If you can spell Zandbroz, Z-A-N-D-B-R-O-Z, you can just put Greg at Zandbroz and email me, and I'm glad to visit with anybody.
Well, Greg, thanks so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us today.
Thanks for having me here.
All right. Stay tuned for more. Today we can arrange travel anywhere around the world with a few clicks of a mouse button. But in 1859, the journey for two young sisters traveling from their homes in Scotland along the Red River to the Canadian frontier was fraught with uncertainty and historical importance.
Traditionally, the highest form of painting is the history painting, like Jacques-Louis David painted the Napoleonic era, the Roman Empire. We here in the Red River Valley, we have an epic history of our own too. We just don't usually brag about it. This painting is a collaboration between two of the best local historians in Red River Valley history, Orabel Thortvedt and Fargo Forum newspaperman Roy Johnson. The two of them did mountains of research on this story and on Fort Abercrombie. I think there's 40 pages of research devoted to Fort Abercrombie and Orabel Thortvedt's notebooks that we have at the museum here. And both of them used every source they could find about Fort Abercrombie to make this the most accurate painting. This is one of our best local history stories from really the founding of settlement in the Red River Valley. It's when the first stagecoach in 1859 comes to meet the first steamboat on the Red River. This was what was finally going to link St. Paul with Fort Garry, today what we call Winnipeg. The two women getting off the stagecoach are Eleonora and Christina Sterling, who were two sisters from Scotland on their way to a trading post deep in the Canadian wilderness, Fort Chipewyan on Lake Athabasca in northeast Alberta, because Eleonora was going to meet her fiance there and get married. So they're on their way from Scotland. They travel the ocean, and then they take the first stagecoach to the Red River, and then when they get there, they're supposed to meet the first steamboat, but the steamboat's there, but the owner of the steamboat, Anson Northrup, he says, if you want to run the steamboat, you're going to have to buy her. Well, they weren't prepared for that, so they had to build a raft. And they spent the next 22 days taking a raft down the Red River, so going north to what's today Winnipeg. And then once they're in Winnipeg, they sail another 300 miles to the tip of Lake Winnipeg, and then they take the last 800 miles in a birch bark canoe. So altogether, it was a 6,000-mile journey for love. Another one of the characters in this painting is in the lower left-hand corner, the man sitting on a bench with a book in his hand. That's George Northrup, who is one of our fascinating, interesting, kind of swashbuckling characters of the early Red River frontier days. Once the steamboat refuses them service, he's the guy that agrees to guide the sisters on the raft those 22 days up to Fort Garry. His friend Adam Stein said he could talk Greek and Latin as fast as he could talk English, and he learned to talk the Sioux language well. So he was one of these kind of like a learned scout, and so that's why Orabel paints him with a book in his hand. Every detail of this painting was painstakingly researched. The original buildings don't exist anymore, but the background of this painting, Orabel used a sketch by Manton Marble, who was a Harper's Monthly Magazine reporter who visited the Red River Valley in 1859 and wrote a story about it. The scene is his sketch. Roy Johnson and Orabel Thortvedt, they communicated with each other back and forth. We have letters where they're saying maybe the Minnesota Stage Company, Stagecoach, the color should be a little bit more orange or something for it to be appropriate for this particular year. Doing a history painting of an important event in Red River Valley history, there's not a whole lot of those. These two people studied this story maybe more than anybody else, and this is their collaboration.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week. But as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. And by the members of Prairie Public.